Cole is a super talented photographer. Is one of my best friends. He was a groomsman at our wedding. He's a native Vermonter, New Englander, and my grandparents had a house in Massachusetts, so we met as young bucks running around on the ocean, surfing and doing other things. And we've lived together in San Francisco and kind of just traveled the world together. Some of his recent work's been in the New Yorker, New York Times. Yeah, just like an absolutely incredible photographer. You can check out his stuff.
Thanks, Ralph. So I guess I sometimes call myself a photo-based artist, using photography as mainly my materials. And I'm going to kind of go through a few different bodies of work that I've been working on for the past anywhere from, I guess, 4 to 6 years. And the first few slides are kind of just like an intro to different works and kind of an overview of places I've photographed, and mostly how, I guess also I'll be talking about how nature is a heavy part of my art practice. And I grew up in Vermont, like Charles said, and Massachusetts, and I was like one of those kids that was never allowed in the house until it was dark out. Even if it was like pissing rain, my mom would be like, nah, out. So we were always like building forts and exploring, and spent a lot of time outdoors. And she's a landscaper and a landscape architect. And both my parents worked at Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School in Colorado. So they were always having us in nature all the time growing up, so much to the point where all I wanted to do at one point was go inside and play video games. But anyways, yeah, so I continued to try to balance my time here in New York working and out in nature exploring, and work on projects that are kind of more based in nature. So recently I thought I'd actually start out with some recent commissions have actually randomly been more nature-based, which has been pretty interesting and fun. Something recent for W Magazine was my interpretation of summer. I was doing a residency in New Zealand, and these were two of the photographs from there. This was for the New Yorker. I was meant to go interpret an exhibition by Roberto Burrow Marx, and these are some of the prints that I made from the pictures, and that was in the magazine for the exhibition. I also work quite frequently in making books for bodies of works, and this first one was published in 2015 and is called about this island Grimsey, which is located in the Arctic Circle 60 miles north of Iceland and has a population of 95 people living on it. So I spent 2 years kind of going through back and forth to this island and going into people's homes and going out on fishing boats and kind of like just really trying to understand the culture there and kind of their way of being in the present day. And this woman, she had the only tree on the island she was so proud of. But, you know, it's obviously a very exposed piece of land. It just gets battered by weather and wind. So all this was actually done by the wind. And I went out on a bunch of fishing boats, and this was in the fish sorting facility. And a lot of kids go from the mainland there to go and work in the fish factories because there's such good work. And this was one of the kids that lives literally 20 steps away from the fish sorting plant. And his life was just doing a 10-hour shift, going to his house, eating, then going back. And they would make tons of cash and then leave. So the schools there's one school, K through 8th grade, is, I think, 12 kids, 13 kids. And there's I thought it was interesting. They have babies out. They just leave them outside to kind of like get acclimated to the weather. I guess. I thought, like, yeah, it's your kid. All right. There's all on the backside of this island on Grimsey. there is a huge bird population that comes and lays their eggs, these puffins. And people, there's a huge tradition in Grimsby of people rappelling down and collecting eggs as part of their culture. So this was one of the rappel ropes. Two twins. This next body of work was made in 2014 about the subculture of the North Shore in Hawaii. And for anyone that's not familiar with it, the North Shore is kind of like the proving ground of surfing, like the Mecca, and it's very much, you know, easily some of the best waves in the world are there, and the subculture is super localized. And I wanted to go and kind of like investigate, make a visual photo essay of what makes this place, what makes the North Shore, and kind of turning my focus on everything besides the actual waves. So it's very loosely anchored around this kid, John Florence, one of the surfers from there. And it was made into a book, which we did 520 copies or something. And this was, you know, an amazing experience, especially coming from the East, where it doesn't look anything like this. This next book, Smoke Jumpers, made in 2017. I actually worked on the project with Charles. And in the design of the book, it's about the wildfire fighters with the U.S. Forest Service. And in the design of the book, the designer and I wanted it to very much feel like a kind of field book. And that's like this soft cover, kind of yellow. And these are some of the images from the smoke jumpers in the wildfires. So it's a mixture of kind of these documentary moments and these portraits, as well as kind of these landscaped imagery mixed with these. I kind of like to hyper focus on objects and kind of make them abstract sometimes to break up the sequence of just looking at a repetitive type of image, if that makes sense. So it was an incredible opportunity, and very grateful to kind of have had access to this one. And there's 3 different types of wildfire fighters that I later learned. There's the smoke jumpers that jump out of the planes and parachute into the fires. And then there's these guys that rappel out of the helis into the fire. And then there's the hot shots that hike in to the fires. And we had access into these 100-acre controlled burns they were doing early in the season to basically kind of train. And I mean, it was very much full on, and a lot of red tape, and I was getting yelled at a lot. But then we had an installation of the work actually here in New York, in Brooklyn, on some rooftop in Red Hook, and the U.S. Forest Service came and talked, and yeah, it was really nice. And these are a few of the ongoing projects I have going. This work is kind of definitely more in the abstract realm that I'm going into now, and it's basically about the conversation of human form and land form. So I went and made these photographs of humans, these kind of hyper-focused details of humans together and their bodies, as well as pairing them with these images from these quarries I was going to in Portugal. And then I wanted to make sure to have some type of free form, so that's where the embroidery is from the sewing I was doing. And this Rio Tinto is this river that I specifically found in Spain, and it's where all the minerals come down from these surrounding mines into this river and create this kind of crazy color red. And I thought that was kind of speaking largely to what I was talking about. So throughout this work, I guess, and in general, like in constantly having nature be a part of my practice and the work that I've made and will continue to make, it's largely about just helping me also understand like my existence in the world and trying to make sense of it, I guess. since we come from nature, I'm trying to kind of understand that connection as well. This was the latest project I released this year called Staya, and it's about these two events that happened within the first 24 hours. My daughter was born. So there was this huge storm called a nor'easter in Massachusetts that happened the same time as the birth of my first child, my only child, Aya. And I didn't really think about it at the time. I was kind of photographing the storm and then photographing the birth. And after I was pairing the images together in studio, I realized it was much about this conversation of two forms of energy, both natural, one being human and one being the storm. So it's these images of kind of these abstract pieces during the storm and after. And I'm done. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Charles. And I guess one other piece I did want to touch on was, after spending such a large time of part of the year traveling to very weird and just far away places, I always really try to link up with a local to just get some ideas of the lay of the land. And I think that the platform that Hipcamp has set up has made it very easy to do just that, where, as you all know, living here, you don't have a lot of time to spare. And if you can kind of have some keys to the gate on to where the good spots are, it's a huge help.
Super cool. Thanks so much for showing us that.
You're welcome, Charles.